with Mr. Michael Vecchione, author of Crooked Brooklyn, as well as, was it All in the Family? Ties in the Family? In the Family?
Friends of the
Friends
Family.
of the Family. Damn it. So close.
Friends of the Family.
And before I let you introduce yourself, for everybody listening, Mr. Vecchione has been on my keyboard, has been on this podcast before, and we talked about his book, Crooked Brooklyn, which we are actually still talking about today. There was one section of it that we didn't get to, and Mr. Vecchione, being a genius and me being fucking retarded, didn't think of going at the probably most interesting, but interesting in a bad way, right? In the sense that the Holocaust is interesting, and it is the body snatchers. But before I keep ranting and making more of an idiot of myself, how about you introduce yourself for the new listeners and then jump into the body snatchers?
Well, first of all, thank you, Tom, for having me back.
Of course.
I had a great time last session, and I was happy to come back and talk to you about Crooked Brooklyn again. My name is Michael Vecchione, and I was the chief of the rackets division in the Brooklyn DA's office for about 13 years. I left in 2013. When the district attorney did not win his reelection, and the new district attorney came in, kind of cleaned house, but I got out before by retiring and started writing books about the things that I had done when I was in the DA's office. So, in fact, we're writing another one right now, and I'm in the editing process. So I hope to be able to come back and talk about that one when we, when it gets out.
Absolutely. I will be present.
And this will make you happy. It's an audio book. So in addition to a print book, but the audio book is the major contract that we were able to get from a place called Tantor Media.
Yep.
They're doing the book, and we got it. We were lucky. We got it just before the pandemic hit, and then even luckier, if you can call it that, to have all the time about being quarantined to be able to write this book. So we're writing it. We're done now, and we're doing the editing process. So
hell yeah.
Be talking about that with you in a couple of months.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's awesome because that's kind of how I looked at it, right? And I almost feel dark because it's like it's like war profiteering, right? It's like business is booming because my family builds tanks and we're fighting the Nazis, so I'm rich. It's quarantine's terrible, 250,000 dead. But man, as someone that does podcasts on Zoom, business is booming because everybody's home. So hey, man, I don't think there's anything.
People have to do something, so they might as well listen to Tommy's podcast.
Exactly. So even more so, it's people are willing to do it that I normally can't get in touch with. They're like, fuck it, I'm stuck at home. I'll do this podcast. But yeah, you'll absolutely be on for that book. But right now, Body Snatchers, which was a chapter in the book, but it just eerie, just unsettling, but like a train wreck, you can't look away. But I'll let you take it away. So give the people a briefing or whatever. Let's just go. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, let me start at the beginning where how we learned about this. There was a sale of a funeral home in Brooklyn to a company that buys funeral homes and owns funeral homes in many different states, and they bought one in Brooklyn. And when one of the owners went to the funeral home to visit it to see what was where the rooms were and what was going on, she wandered into a room that was not necessarily accessible to unless you knew it was there, and the person kind of showing her around knew it was there. And the reason it was secret, I call it a secret room in the book, is because what was happening there was completely illegal. A fellow by the name of Michael Mastromarino, who was a dental surgeon at one point in his life, got into a lot of trouble with drugs. He was addicted to Demerol, and he would use the Demerol even when he was going to do dental surgery, if you could imagine.
Yeah.
And he was able to also get some other people addicted to it as well, some people who he knew. And it was a terrible situation because one day he fell asleep in the middle of a dental surgery procedure because he had taken too much of the drug.
Yeah.
And he had been warned in the past about this, had was on a kind of a watch list this was in New Jersey where it happened. And this was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back. He lost his license, and he was a prominent dental surgeon. He had written a very well-respected textbook on dental surgery. And he was an all-American boy. He was a football player at Villanova University. He was a guy who was well respected in his profession. And when he lost his license, he basically lost his livelihood. It was all that he had been able to do and all that he did. And the problem was that he had been living very, very high on the hog, so to speak. He had a mansion in, I think it was Fort Lee, New Jersey. He had a bunch of cars, and he was just living the high life. Well, with no income now, he had to find another way to keep up his standard of living. So he knew, because he was a dental surgeon, he knew about the idea of implants. And a dental implant sometimes requires a transplant of a piece of bone into an individual's mouth. It then bone knits, and once it becomes part of the jaw, then you can put the implant into that part of into that space, and the implant works perfectly. Well, the problem is that bone from humans is not very accessible. He knew that it was going to be a difficult thing for him to do. And he started out legitimately by working with funeral homes and getting the funeral homes to ask people who were burying their loved ones if they would allow him to harvest the bone so that he could use it for this implant surgery. And of course, he got absolutely no yes. They were all no's.
Yeah, no takers.
Not going to give you the opportunity to take my loved one's body apart, etc.
Yeah.
Industry was also important for other places other than the mouth on an individual, because bone can be transplanted into other parts of the body, arm, leg, etc. So he knew that this was lucrative, but he couldn't do it legitimately. So he came up with this plan. And the plan was to contract, if you want to call it that, with funeral directors in New York City, Jersey, Philadelphia, upstate New York, to tip him off when a body would come in. And illegally, he would send his people to the funeral home, and they would then cut the body open and literally steal the bone, steal the tissue, steal whatever they could. And if the body was then going to be laid out or displayed in a wake, the cutters, as we call them, would fill the body up with whatever they could find. Sometimes garbage. They would eat their lunch and there would be papers around and they would stick them in there. But for the most part, they also bought at plumbing supply stores PVC pipe.
Yeah.
And they filled the legs or the arms, wherever they were doing it, with PVC pipe, and then used the garbage and the debris from their lunch and other things to kind of to fill it out so that the leg would look like a normal leg, or an arm would look like a normal arm. And that's what that room in the Brooklyn funeral home was being used for. So the woman who bought this funeral home discovered that, and when she went into the room, she asked one of the cutters, what's going on in here? And he told her what was happening. Of course, he didn't say it was illegal. He said, we have permission to take this. And she wondered why the body looked so decrepit, quite frankly. I know the body was dead, but it really looked not like it should look if it was being embalmed. And she went over and touched the arm and the leg, and she told us that it felt like it was really squishy, like there was nothing in there. Well, there wasn't. If there was something in there, it was usually this kind of debris that they had put in.
Jesus Christ.
Yes. So she then completed the sale, but when she went over the books with her attorney, they discovered that the prior owner had sold about $300,000 worth of pre-death funerals, prepaid funerals, so that if someone died, they would then use that funeral home. It had already been paid for, and then the wake and etc. The funeral would take place. Well, it turns out that in the sale, the previous owner did not tell her about this $300,000, which should have been in the funeral home's account for the new owner to take over and use, etc. Well, it wasn't. So she went to the police. She went into the local precinct, sat down with a detective, and told the detective about the embezzlement, or whatever you want to call it, of this money. The detective, as usually happens with white collar crimes, would come into the rackets division and sit with us and help and get one of our assistant DAs to help them do this case. But as an aside, when my assistant DA was interviewing this woman, the owner of the new owner of the funeral home, she told him as an aside, and you know what I saw? And she tells him about going into the room and touching the arm and hearing the squishy, seeing, and she told him about they were taking body parts. So my assistant's name is Josh. Josh came into me and said, Mike, I have this detective in my office. She's complaining with a complainant about having money stolen. But I got to tell you, there's another part of this case that kind of indicates at this point that these people were stealing bone and tissue from the bodies or taking it illegally. So which part of the case do you want me to go with?
Yeah.
So I said, let's worry about the $300,000 another time. Let's go with this case.
The body snatchers.
So that's how we got off on the investigation. And we soon discovered that checking with records and things like that there were about 1,000 or 1,100 cases in Brooklyn that were affected by this guy, Mastro Marino, and his people. So we needed more, because in each of the cases, Tommy, there was in each of the files of these poor deceased in the funeral home was a permission slip. Yes, you can take the bone and tissue, signed by Aunt, Mary from the family. In addition, there was a death certificate, which indicated that the person died of generally either a heart attack or a car accident or a slip and fall, that kind of thing. Okay.
COVID.
So we immediately believed that all of that stuff was bogus. So we sent a team of detectives out into the field with the permission slips, with the permission slips, really, because the death certificates we handled in another way. And we would literally knock on the door of Tommy Carrigan's mom.
Yeah.
And they would say, Mrs. Carrigan, did you have a death? Did your father, Joe Carrigan, die? Yes. Well, this is your signature on here, giving permission to. So she looked at it and would say, no, that's not my signature. Other times, it wouldn't be, let's say, your mom's name. It would be, let's say, Bill Jones giving permission to take the Mr. Carrigan's body, right? They would say, we don't even have a Bill Jones in our family. I have no idea what's going on.
Okay.
Turns out that every one of these permission slips was a forgery. And what Mastro Marino did, he would also forge the death certificate. He was taking bone and tissue from people who had died of communicable diseases, HIV, hepatitis.
Oh, Jesus.
He was taking bone and tissue from people who were 95 years old and selling it to a processing company for implantation into, let's say, someone's arm or leg who needed it. So let's say you were needed to have an implant,
Sure.
a bone implant. Right? Could you imagine receiving the arm or the femur of someone who's 95 and 96 years old? It was going to last you probably never.
Yeah.
It wouldn't last at all.
Yeah.
So that's what was happening. And what we found out as we continued to do this investigation was that if a body was cremated, they would take everything. They would take all of the bone, every bone in the body. They would take every tissue that they could possibly take. So when the body went into the crematory, it would come out with as we were told by one of the victim's family, she said, I knew that there was something wrong with the ashes because it was like baby powder. I expected there to be a little bit of bone fragment and this and that, and there was nothing. So they would take it completely. They would take as much as they could and then put it in the oven and cremate the body, and it would come out, as I said, like baby powder.
Yeah.
So the thing broke open when Alistair Cook, who was a very famous British TV host. He'd done Masterpiece Theater and he hosted Masterpiece Theater, and he was one of the people, or one of the bodies, I should say, that was cremated, but also had been ravaged by Mastro Marino's crew. And when we went to his daughter, we asked her if she had given permission, and of course she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't give permission. My father would never have allowed me to do that. He wanted to be cremated, but he never would have allowed that to happen. And I certainly didn't do it." Well, we said, "Here's your signature on here. You say you did it." She said, "That's not my signature and I never did it. I don't even know what you're talking about." Then it hit the newspapers. Once that hit the paper that Alistair Cook's was a body that was part of this whole fiasco, and that his daughter was part of this thing, then it blew up. The entire case blew up. And we went off and we had to make a decision as to how many bodies we were going to, investigate. We had so many, Tom, that we had to narrow it down. So we chose 10 bodies in Brooklyn. And what we needed to do, the next step, was to see if what we were told was happening or felt was happening was actually true. We had to exhume many of these bodies.
Yeah.
So we had to exhume all 10. And we had to now go back to the families after telling them that, first of all, we believe that your loved one's bones and tissue were ravaged. We now have to open up the grave and take out your loved one's body and send it to the medical examiner to see if, in fact, that's the case. And we did that. In fact, on one occasion, it was so horrible. The body was brought up from the grave, and the people who had put the straps on the underneath the coffin, it tilted, and the body, the legs and feet came out the bottom of the coffin. So it was really a horror show. It was like a horror movie.
That is some horror movie shit.
Yeah, it was really bad. So when they got the bodies back to the medical examiner, sure enough, they took X-rays and discovered that the PVC pipes that we had heard was used to fill up the legs and arms, in fact, was there. And we have pictures in the book of the X-rays. The other thing that we saw that was really macabre was the fact that in order for the foot and ankle to stay on the PVC pipe, they had to put a bolt through the ankle and through the PVC pipe so that the foot would stay in place, so that when it was embalmed and when it was laid out and displayed in the coffin, it wouldn't look bad. And those bolts, like a Frankenstein monster bolt, is on the X-ray that we pictures of the X-ray that we have. So
I have a question. So this is already all just like horror movie, just I mean concentration camp level, just like macabre. But I have to ask, who were the cutters? Who were these guys that were cogs in the machine? Who were the goons that did this? That just got caught up in. I mean, at what point are you like bolting feet through PVC piping after putting your Happy Meal trash in the skull cavity? At what point were these guys like, is this above board?
Well, number one, there was no specific crime for that in the state.
Fair.
The best we could get at the initial stages of the investigation was had to do with disposing of a body and improperly disposing of a body, etc. There was no crime for taking bone out of a dead person's body, even though there has to be permission that crime about the permission and lack of permission was really not much of a punishment if we were able to get them for that. So so the answer to your question is no, it was not legal for them to do it because of the permission aspect.
Yeah.
So what we had to do is we had to fashion a RICO case, sort of a RICO case. The New York State has a law that mirrors RICO. It's called OCA, Organized Crime Control Act. And what we needed to do was to establish that there was a group that was involved in these crimes that fit, as predicate crimes in this act, and they did, because there were forgeries and there were things like that, because they forged the documents, they forged the death certificates, etc. And we were able to now fashion a crime out of using the OCA statute, which carried a life sentence. Okay. So we went from having a very minor thing like these, kind of minor forgeries of death certificates and these documents and improperly disposing of a body, that kind of thing, to a B felony, which carried or maybe it might be an A felony. I don't remember, but it carried a great many, a lot of years. I think the OCA was a B felony and carries 25 years. I'm wrong about the life, I believe, but I'm not. I've been at it doing this for a long time, so I don't really remember. But the OCA was what got us to where we wanted to go with being able to punish Mastro Marino and these two guys who were his cohorts. Now, you say, where did he get them from? They were people who he had come across during the course of his practice. He was a dentist for a while, so he had people and a dental surgeon, so he knew people who were in this business. And what he did was he would train others in different parts of the country. For instance, he had a whole group in Philadelphia that he was using. He had a group up in Rochester, New York, that he had trained to do this. We found out also during this investigation that he had cut a deal with a Jewish old age home in Manhattan, and the deal was going to be that when someone died in that old age home, they were going to tip him off that they were sending the body to a particular. They would make sure that it would go to one of the funeral homes that he had a deal with, and then he would use them and take the body and take all of the bone and tissue out of the body. Of course, not telling anybody who was any relatives. And the reason he used this home is because there were a lot of people in there who didn't have families. They were so old and they didn't have most of their family died, etc. The other thing we found out is that he had cut a deal with a prison in Russia.
Jesus Christ.
And what they were going to do was when someone died in the prison, they were going to notify him. He had a group over in Europe and in Russia to take the body to Germany, and he had a setup in Germany where he would do the same thing that he was doing in Brooklyn and other places here in the United States. So he was literally making a fortune. The bone and tissue processing companies were paying a good deal of money for bone and tissue, and you can imagine why, because it's not generally available.
Yeah.
Most likely, if you're going to a dentist and you're going to have an implant, they will use, a piece of pig bone, or an animal bone, not human bone. Human bone was rare because nobody would give permission to have it removed from their loved one's body. But it was preferable to having an animal bone. And but the problem was that he was lying also. That was the other thing we discovered. In addition to the death certificate being forged, in addition to the permission slip being forged, the processing companies required him to provide a vial of blood from the deceased, so that they could test the blood and make sure that the blood was not contaminated in any way. So, of course, he did have bodies that he was using. He didn't care. He was taking, as I said, HIV, hepatitis, cancer. Cancer is not contagious, but you can imagine how difficult it would be for a cancer-ridden bone to last for a number of years in a transplant. But so what he was doing to get past that is he would carry around what he called clean blood. He had vials of blood that came from various sources that he knew to be clean. And he would then, he would keep them, and he would send the vial of that clean blood along with the forged documents and the bone and tissue down to the processing company. Generally, they were in the South, somewhere in Texas and Florida and places in the South. And then they would then go ahead and process the bone and tissue and use it in someone's body. And when this thing hit, the FDA issued a nationwide recall for anyone who had a doctor who put an implant into their body. If it had come from this list of processing companies, which we were able to figure out and provide to the FDA, then they were required, the patient was required to go to their doctor to be tested for diseases. And there were some and they said they had to be tested for the rest of their life, because it was not something that you did tested once and you're okay. You had to go back on a periodic basis for the rest of your life in order to ensure that you did not contract HIV, or you did not contract hepatitis, etc.
So it kind of seems like that's, if I'm drawing this in my mind correctly, it's like getting Al Capone for tax evasion. It's getting this body snatcher, but you're getting them for like forgeries and for like sidestepping using the correct blood vials and stuff. Is that right?
Yes, correct. That's why we went for the OCA, because it carried a lot more in terms of potential penalty. So, and as it turned out, he got 56 years. Mastro Marino. He was sentenced to 56 years. And I won't tell you the end until we get to the end in terms of Mastro Marino, but it's an ironic ending and kind of justice, quite frankly.
Yeah. That guy definitely has a name of someone that you think would be a body snatcher. If he's a dentist hooked on Demerol and his name's Master Marino, that just from the get-go sounds like somebody's who's up to some shady shit.
Yeah. Well, one of the people that he taught how to do this was a mistress of his. I mean, he was married and had kids.
Naturally.
But he had a mistress who he taught how to do this. I think she was in Rochester. It was either Rochester or Philadelphia. I'm not sure. But we were, of course, we then notified the authorities in the other jurisdictions, and they opened up their own investigations. And everyone who was touched by this, every family who was touched by this, sued the Mastro Marino, estate and others, and all collected money. I'm not sure how much. Of course, nothing could really serve them to bring back their, or to put them at peace. The money wasn't going to do that for them, So, but they did. They were able to get it. So that was at least one good thing in the whole situation that happened.
Yeah. So, now, did they have to take anybody? So, like, exhuming the bodies, was there anyone that they took to use for evidence? Did they get anyone that got an implant? So let's say I got one. Was there any examples of you guys going to someone and having it removed and looking at the DNA?
We would have, but we never got that far because, first of all, we were able to make the case using the cadavers. But if we had gone further, we would have reached out for people who had implants. But it didn't. It wasn't necessary for us. The case he wound up pleading guilty as opposed to going to a trial. We were able to get one of the cutters to become a witness for us. We turned him, and he got a deal. Not the greatest deal. He got time, and he had to do time, but it was certainly less than 56 years. And the other cutter went to trial. He put us to the test. and we convicted him, and he went to jail for a significant amount of time as well. The interesting, the thing about this that also struck me, that I've done a lot of cases, I've done a lot of trials in my career. The interest by family members for this case was beyond anything I had ever seen.
Yeah.
They were in court every single day. And I'm talking about, more, and it's not like one person showing up. It was members of the family of almost every one of the victims that we chose to use in this case. Used to show up, and then they would have their family, and the courtroom would be packed, with victims' families who were interested in seeing what occurred. And on the date of sentence, they were all permitted to make a statement, to the judge, and nobody turned us down. Everybody wanted to say something, and it was heartbreaking. I mean, heartbreaking, thinking that their loved one had died and was at peace, and then knowing that they had been ravaged, the body had been ravaged, was something that it was very difficult for each of them to handle. So it was a case that I will never forget. When we locked up or announced the indictment of Mastro Marino and the two cutters, we had a press conference at the DA's office. I have never seen a press conference like this. It was covered worldwide.
Yeah.
We had so many reporters that we had to use several rooms in order to hold the reporters, and it was broadcast. It was broadcast around the world. There were people from notifying our press office that they had seen it, in other countries. So it was an unbelievable case. It really was an unbelievable case. So.
Now, for those people making those statements in court, is that something where you had to have maybe more security in court for people losing their cool and just wanting to rip Master Marino's face off?
Well, the answer is yes. They had a lot of court officers who would surround him, and they weren't going to take any chances.
Yeah.
One of the people that we also, I should mention this, is that we were also able to identify the funeral directors who had cut deals with Mastro Marino for tipping him off to a death, and they got locked up and charged as well. So it was a wide ranging indictment in terms of people that were involved in this whole thing. But Mastro Marino was the centerpiece. He and the two cutters were the centerpiece.
Yeah.
So it was it's a case I'll never forget. And I did mention, I think I mentioned the last time I appeared on your podcast, is that when we began this investigation and we ultimately were able to get a search warrant for his home, we went into his garage and he had meat lockers. He had freezers in there that you would store, like steaks and chickens and stuff. And he had body parts in there. So
my eyes were watering. I just
it was quite a scene.
But this is perfect proof right now. Like, as disgusting as it is, and I physically just got nauseous. Yet I am right now in real time. Like, I am hooked on what happens next, and it's. So what I am right now is just a microcosm of everyone. It's like you can't look away.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of people couldn't.
Yeah,
a lot of people couldn't. People said it was disgusting, but everybody wanted to know more and more and more about it.
Yeah.
The idea. I got to tell you that the one impact, or the one lasting, I guess, image is of those X-rays of the leg with the PVC pipe and the bolt going through, the ankle to hold the foot together, and other body parts that had the PVC pipe in it. I don't think that this guy would. I think that a jury, if we had tried this case, a jury would have been out maybe 5 minutes before coming back with a conviction. It was that kind of case, and it touched the nerves of everyone who was involved in the case and everyone who heard about the case. It was it was the kind of thing that, you I've never seen anything like it, and I've never seen anything since. I've never seen anything before, and never seen anything, since. There are people who do this kind of stuff on a regular basis, but they don't do it in the way that Mastro Marino did it. Somebody has to harvest bone and tissue for implant, but you do it in a way that is going to be you do it a legal way,
a legitimate business.
Yeah, and you do it. If someone is going to harvest bone, you harvest it from the unfortunate person who died maybe in their 20s or 30s or 40s without these communicable diseases, because you can't put bone and tissue into someone's body that came out of someone who had HIV or hepatitis. It doesn't. The processing companies would not take a bone that came out of someone if they learned that the person had died of HIV, or had died of hepatitis, or had died of some other horrible communicable disease. They would not do it. So that tells you all you need to know about what this guy was doing wrong. So the Alistair Cook thing. He was 95 years old. So I can't imagine getting his leg or leg bone, femur or tibia or whatever it is, and having it implanted into my body when it has already spent 95 years on Earth. It's not something which is going to last very long. But so they would lie. They would just simply lie. They would put his age down as 72 or 65 or whatever, as opposed to 95.
Yeah. Well, I can feel my own blood pressure rising as I think about my oldest sibling who committed suicide in 2014 and who we had cremated, perfectly healthy. He was 27 at the time.
Right.
That's prime real estate for Mastro Marino, and that's
are you
that's
kidding?
Making me think I've seen his cremation. I know there were bones in it.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking now, I'm 30, I got a podcast going, it seems like everything's smooth sailing. And even in just the last 2 minutes thinking about that, part of my brain is I would hunt this guy down and I would I would live stream me killing him.
Yeah.
And it's
well, the funeral directors can't escape without a lot of scrutiny either when you think about it, because they were doing this, and they weren't getting paid a great deal of money. They would get paid $50 or $100 to tip off Mastro Marino that the body was coming into the funeral home, and they would do it on a regular basis. So it was more of a volume thing than a lucrative kind of thing. If you got a body and it happened once every 2 years that you tipped them off, then you would charge a lot more money. These guys were doing $50, $100 because they had volume. People were dying and they were showing up at these funeral homes, and they would get tipped off and come and and ravage them. So it was it was easy money for the funeral director, but and they thought that they weren't going to get caught. Now let me go back to that room. I want to tell you about the room. So this secret room, I at some point went to the funeral home, and what used to happen, and it was in the Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn, and what used to happen is the deal between the funeral director, who we locked up, and who also had something unfortunate happened to him. Again, you talk about karma and justice. After he had gotten locked up, he was released on, I guess he was on bail, and he was doing some work on the roof of his house. And he claims that he slipped and fell and had major damage to his bones and things like that. Now, there was some conspiracy theorists at that time that thought that, this guy somehow was pushed because they thought he was going to talk, and there were a lot more people involved in this whole thing. But be that as it may, it was his funeral home. He had sold it to the people who tipped us off to this. And what the way it worked is when a body would come in, it wouldn't. There was a back area where the Mastro Marino bodies would drive in, and they would go into this room, this kind of not a garage, but a driveway. and they would bring the body into a room on the first floor, and they would put it onto this device which had a hydraulic lift, and the lift, they would put the body on it, and then it would lift. It would go up into the floor of the second story of the building, into that room I was talking about. And you couldn't see, once the body was up there and they lowered the lift again, they had it so that if you looked up into the ceiling of the first floor, you wouldn't be able to see any outline of an opening. It was a secret opening that would allow them to bring these bodies that the deals were cut to up into the embalming area of the funeral home. No one would see them, and that room was used only by Mastro Marino's people. And unless you knew it was there and you knew how bodies got up into that room, you would never be able to figure it out. You'd wonder, how did they get up there? How did the body get up there? How did it get into this room? And this guy that owned the funeral home had contracted to get this done, and that's how they got these bodies up there. They got them up into this secret room using this hydraulic lift, which then came down and disappeared into the floor of this garage area, driveway area, and you couldn't see it, only if you knew it was there. And once you got somebody on it, it would lift, go into the ceiling, or the ceiling of the first floor of the second floor, and would then disappear. When it came down, it would close, the door would close, and you couldn't see that it was there. And then they would take the body and do whatever they were going to do with it. So
this sounds
quite an
like
operation.
This sounds like something that, like, before the internet, before you could have a podcast with you with this experience, sharing your story to me, nodding here like an idiot. Before the internet, this is something that you and your friends smoked pot in high school, and one of you says, "Dude, my uncle was in the rackets division, and he said," and you go, "That guy," you go, "Dude, he's pulling your leg," or you're like, "Dude, you're too high, like, put down the joint." But it's almost like, isn't it one of, like, Goebbels, I think? It was like, make the lie big enough and hide it in plain sight that everyone will believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone came out and was like, "I'm telling you, they're doing this," it was like, okay, already fantastic enough. But where are they doing it? I'm telling you, there's a secret hydraulic lift that lifts, right? It's almost like if you make it so absurd, it hides itself.
Exactly. You know, I'll tell you how underestimated the case was by people other than us.
Yeah.
When we first started the investigation and Master Marino's people got wind of it, and I get a call from his lawyer, and I'll never forget the conversation. He calls me, and I knew him, and he calls me and says, "Mike, you're investigating my client," and of course I knew who he was, and I said, "Well, who's your client?" One of those kind of deals. And he told me, and I said, "Yeah, okay, what's the issue? You looking to plead guilty?" He started to laugh. He said, "Do you think that any jury would ever convict my client?" He said, "This is nothing but a paper crime." So somebody had some papers. They filled out the death certificate wrong. They filled out a document that they made a mistake in putting down, what the cause of death was, and so they signed some permission slip. So what? Nobody is going to send my client to jail for some paper crime. His name was Frank. I said, "Frank, I got to tell you something. You have no idea about how the interest and the family, and how much the families want to hang your client. The families of these people, given the fact that we know that they're dead. Of course they're dead. But these people felt that their loved ones were resting in peace. And now they find out that your client took their legs apart, took their arms and cut their bones out, and took their bones." I said, "This is not something that is going to sit well with anyone. And I can tell you that if you go to trial with this, you'll get the full force of this, their anger on your client." And he said, nah. Well, ultimately, he realized what he was up against, and he did plead guilty, as I told you before. So.
It's just
he just could not. He could not believe it. And Master Marino was, I have to say, I think he was very arrogant in the beginning when he would come in and try to sell us on the idea that he wasn't doing anything wrong. Ultimately, when he pled guilty and had to do his allocution, which is to say what he had done, he became somewhat contrite at that point. And I think he was trying to save his ass, quite frankly, from jail time. I think he was trying to minimize the amount of jail time he was going to take. So, but it turns out that, he got 54 years. So that's that's a lot of time. And he was going to come out. He was probably going to be in his 90s by the time he came out. So nobody had any sympathy for the fact that he got 54 years. Believe me, nobody. In fact, there was some family members who said it wasn't even enough. He should have gotten life.
What was the? And I'm sorry if you said it and I missed it. What was the total number of bodies that he did this with? We had about 1,100 that we were able to uncover. There were more because there were other jurisdictions that we alerted them to the fact and they had bodies there. But I can only tell you about Brooklyn. We uncovered about 1,100. We wound up just doing 10 as part of the indictment because how many, you can't have an indictment that's, 1,000 charges, it's just not practical. So we concentrated on 10 very, very good cases, exhumed the bodies, and we had them. I mean, we had them locked. There's no question. And then once we got one of the cutters to turn and tell us the whole plan, the entire, the way that everything worked, there was no escape for him at that point. Yeah. So there are a lot of people walking around right now with implants that probably don't know and probably don't care to know.
Well, they know now because they had this. The
recall.
Yeah, the recall, and they have to go back to, to their doctors for periodic examination. So, very bad situation. Really bad situation. There was one, I don't remember which TV show. There were several documentaries done about this case. And I remember one of them, there was a woman who talked about how sick she actually did get following the transplant, so that's, that's it. That's essentially it. I can tell you, what ultimately happened to Master Marino.
Yeah, you've been holding out. Tell me.
So keep in mind that he was stealing bone for the most part, tissue, but mostly bone, right? And so I'm in my office one day, and someone walks in, and they said, "Have you heard?" I said, "What happened?" He said, "Master Marino died in prison." I said, "What?" Because he was not sick. At least he wasn't outwardly sick. Well, he had bone cancer. And no, that's everybody's reaction. He died of bone cancer. So
I don't wish, so obviously you can't win, but I mean, at some point you gotta just laugh at like the humor that sometimes life dishes out.
Yeah, life does do that. I got to tell you one other little story. After the case was over, as I said, there were bunch of TV shows that were looking to do documentaries on this. And I get a call one day from a TV show, and I don't think it's on anymore. And it was something like I Married a Monster or something of that nature. And I found out what the show was about. And it was exactly that. It was about, a family not knowing what kind of person they had as their husband and father. So they told me to come to a particular studio. I go to this studio in Manhattan. It was kind of a decrepit little studio, and it was in the back of kind of on the first floor, but in the back of the first floor lobby area, and it was nothing to speak of. And I walk back there, and there's this Coke machine. I'll never forget this: a Coke machine, a couple of sofas, and a chair in this kind of really rundown area. The studio itself was the next room over. This was kind of like the green room, they said.
Okay.
Right? So there was this woman sitting in the on one of the sofas, and I walk in, and I nodded. I say hello, and she said, "You're Mike Vecchione, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Who are you?" She said, "I am Barbara Mastro."
Oh yeah,
I'm Barbara Mastro Marino. I said, to myself, oh my God. Now I'm in this little area where I can't go anywhere with the wife of the guy that went to jail for 54 years and then died of bone cancer. You know what she said to me, Tommy? She thanked me. She said, "I want to thank you for what you did for my family." She said, because we had no idea that he was such a monster.
Yeah.
And my family and I have had to live with this since, it came out. And she said, I changed my name. She said, my name is now Mastro as opposed to Mastro Marino. She said the only person in her family that did not feel that way and still kind of loved the husband, loved the father, etc. He was still alive at that time, now that I think about it, because her son was in the studio being filmed about his story. And her son, she told me, would go visit him in jail and was never able to really accept the fact that his father was such a monster. Yeah. And so she said to me, she said, if you don't mind, when he's done, if you could just simply kind of, sit over there and don't tell him who you are, because I didn't know the kid. She said, because he'll get very upset and probably very angry at you. So I did, and I did what she said to me. What she asked me to do, and the kid came out and they left, and then I went in and did my thing. But that was a bizarre ending to a bizarre case, I have to tell you. It was meeting the wife, and she stuck by him in the beginning. Every time he was in court, she was there, and and she didn't believe it for a long time. I mean, she just didn't accept it, and then finally her eyes were opened, and she realized what kind of a monster this guy was. So
yeah, I mean, I can definitely see at first like sticking with him, be like, this isn't the person I love, so like I'm gonna help this person I love through these bullshit allegations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And she was, she had lost her entire life, had gone down the tubes at that point. They lost their house because the house had to be forfeited to pay
all this shit,
pay off all of these, these victims' families, and she suffered a great deal as a result of this thing. And she had nothing to do with it. She didn't even know. First of all, she didn't know about the mistress.
Okay.
And she had no idea. I mean, that all came out during the course of the investigation and the preliminary proceedings and things like that. And she certainly didn't know what her husband was doing. I mean, she had no idea that he was doing this stuff. She just knew that he had provided for her as a dental surgeon. Now he was providing, as God knows what he told her he was doing, as far as this stuff is concerned. He probably said he gotten permission from all of the families to do this stuff, but she really had no idea. And clearly she never went into that garage and opened up those, they were all locked. So those meat lockers, she had never gone in there to see that, because she wasn't going to make leg of person for dinner. So
if someone in your family ever starts putting industrial meat lockers in your house and locks them, something's up. I think that's a pretty fair rule, right?
Yeah. Although what I have to say in her defense, Tommy, is that they didn't look like anything other than what you would have in your basement if you had you bought steaks and chicken and
sure.
and burgers and stuff and kept them in a freezer. They didn't look any different than that. They were
sure.
Those white freezers, low white freezers, and
pull the
top comes up. Yeah. So
how many did he have?
I don't remember. He had several, but I don't remember. I just don't recall.
That's where it gets a little hairy. I know what they are. Yeah, we have one at our lake house. You go hunting, sure, you got to put your shit in there.
Yeah, so if you were, if you walked in and she saw them, I don't think that she had access to the area that, that we ultimately found these things in. But But she claimed she knew nothing about what was going on. And quite frankly, she had no reason to lie to me at the end as far as this stuff is concerned. So, but justice was ultimately done. And it didn't take very long for it to get done either. He was in jail only a few years before he died. So he must have had bone cancer before he went in.
Which is just the most ironic thing ever.
But could you also imagine, I always think about this a lot, can you imagine being that, I mean, I don't know if you've ever gone through dental surgery, but I just did about 5 months ago. And I was thinking as that was going on, that if the surgeon was high on Demerol or and he just fell asleep with this, with this knife in his hand or whatever it is, the scalpel or something, and he falls asleep right now, God knows, I don't know what's going to happen to me or happen to my mouth. Well, this is what happened to this poor, unfortunate guy that was under dental, was being worked on by Mastro Marino when he ultimately fell asleep. I mean, that's quite must have been quite a scene in his office.
Those are almost like the things that you just kind of don't want to. I know for me at least, right? If we hear about like orthopedic surgeons or pediatric surgeons that get fired because they're just like half in the bag during a surgery, or like an airline pilot, I almost feel like you don't want to know.
You don't? Oh no, you don't.
Yeah, just fly. I don't care. Are we going back and forth? Maybe he's drunk. Maybe it's turbulence. I'll just believe it's turbulence.
But it's hard not to know if the guy falls asleep right in the middle of the surgery, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So that was a tip-off that something was wrong. So, and you could see why the authorities would revoke his license as a result of something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a no-brainer, and and he had been addicted for a while from what we learned, and. People started talking, people saying, I wondered what was going on. He did have, there were some issues. There were this, that, and the other thing, so. But it was as I said to you before, it was a case that will be with me forever. I don't think I'll ever forget the details of the case. It was unbelievable. And I remember when I arraigned him in the courthouse. It was the day that we announced the indictment and brought him over to see a judge. The courtroom, of course, was packed with reporters and everyone else. And I remember just using the term that this was medical terrorism. And it was, it was the phrase that was in every newspaper the next day, every newspaper story, and it was, but to me, that's what it was. I mean, just think about it. Just think of what it caused to, in the minds of all of the people who had implants from these companies, that it was something which, they will probably never forget, and hopefully will not suffer any kind of, disease or damage from it. So,
medical terrorism. That's the only
medical terrorism is what I called it. Yeah.
The only way it could get sexier is if he was using the money from that to fund a politician, because then it would actually be violence for political gain. then it would be just, they would have everything. Who knows what he did with the money? I know that some of it went to his lifestyle, that's for sure, and some of it went to his mistress, and some of it went to his big cars and his beautiful house in Fort Lee, New Jersey. But who knows? He might very well have been contributing to political campaigns. I don't know. Jesus, so. Yeah, it's almost was it Bormann, or I don't remember who, Goring. They'd have their own gold teeth made out of the gold teeth pulled from dead Jews.
Yeah, from the victims of the Holocaust. I know. That's a bad situation, but it's so I encourage your listeners and viewers to get the book and read the details of the story. It'll be hair raising, literally. Yeah. I mean, it's the kind of thing that if someone told me the story, my initial reaction would be, "Now you're making it up."
Exactly. Right.
It's
bullshit.
That never happened. It's a good fiction writer's scenario that looking to scare air people, and if it turned out to be a script on the Walking Dead or something, I would say, that's a great writer, man. The guy's got a great imagination. That's not something that would ever happen in real life. Sure enough.
Yeah.
Sure enough, it did.
Yeah. That would be that would be a 3-part CSI episode, right?
Yeah.
With
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And topped off with the idea that at the end, they have on a movie or a TV show where they have so-and-so lived until he was, so it would be on such and such a date, Master Marino died of bone cancer.
Bone cancer.
Yeah.
It all comes around. Yeah. So for anyone listening, I mean, I've obviously had you on, and we talked about the book last time, Crooked Brooklyn. Even if you just get it just to listen to the Body Snatchers, I mean, it's one of those things you can't turn away from. So shit, even if you just get it to listen to that part, get the book, Crooked Brooklyn. It'll be in the description and the link in the top link. I'm having a stroke. It'll be in the sticky top comment as well as in the description. And I know you say you're not going to be finished with the other book. It won't be ready till next year. But
yeah, it'll be. We're turning it in January. And then there's got to, you got to go through the edit process with each of the publisher company and with the audio company. And we don't even have at this point, we don't even have an indication as to when the publication date. But I'm thinking maybe they'll have it ready by summertime. That's what I'm thinking. So,
but Friends of the Family is out. It's on Kindle, but
Friends of the Family is out. Yeah,
but not Audible.
Friends of the Family is out. Behind the Murder Curtain is out, and certainly Crooked Brooklyn is out. So.
Well, I've had you on for Crooked Brooklyn. I've had Bruce Sackman on for Behind the Murder Curtain, but I have not done Friends of the Family yet. So I'm going to email or text you after this, and let's set up a Friends of the Family episode.
I'll be happy to do it. Happy to do it with you. So thank you, Tom.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Michael Vecchione, author of Crooked Brooklyn. It'll be in the top comment and in the description. And we went 1 minute over, 3:16 p.m. Eastern time.
Correct.
You have a wonderful Thanksgiving, sir. Stay safe.
Thank you, Tom. You too, and to you and your family.
Thank you,
hopefully
sir.
It'll be a happy one and a safe one. So.
It will be a safe one and a happy one. I won't let anyone take that away from me. God bless everybody.
Text me and we'll set up a Friends of the Family.
Absolutely.
Friends of the Family date.
I will text you in the next 2 minutes.
Terrific. Okay,
all right,
Tom.
All right, my man. Take care.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Yep.
Bye-bye.